Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may happen to be, and whether you're watching live or archived. And welcome to episode number 45 in Nautel's Transmission Talk Tuesday webinar series. We're switching things up a little bit. We're not talking so much about transmitters, and we're talking a little more about the stuff that runs through them. And in keeping with my theory that there's always somebody out there smarter than me for just about any topic, ask my wife, she'll tell you. But I've picked, so we've got an old friend and a new friend today. First, the VP of Advanced Engineering for NAB, David Layer, is with us. David, welcome. Some of you folks may recognize David. He's been with us once or twice before.
Hi, Jeff, and everyone. Thanks for having me today.
Always a lot of fun. And rounding out, a new friend, Lawrence Galkoff from Radioplayer Worldwide. Lawrence is the general manager with Radioplayer, and he's joining us from the UK.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everybody from a miserable, wintry London. It's horrible out there.
So it's about 90% humidity and around 25 degrees Celsius or 79 or so Fahrenheit here. I'm not sure. My wife would tell you that we'll trade you on that in a heartbeat. But and David, you're a little further south.
I think I've got you both beat because tomorrow we're going to get the remnants of that hurricane that devastated Louisiana, and they're saying we're going to get 5 to 8 inches of rain here in Maryland. So later today, I'll be out checking my gutters.
I will take my 78 or 79% humidity in comparison to that. So I'm going to tell folks the topic today is carb dashboards and hybrid radio and kind of improving your presence. And what brought this on was we did the RDS session, I don't know, 3-4 episodes ago, let's say a month, give or take. And Lawrence reached out to me after and said, hey, you know, I'm glad you talked about that because it's really kind of important, especially going forward to hybrid radio, to have the RDS formatted right. And I said, huh? Because of course, you know, again, finding people smarter than me, I know just enough to be dangerous, as we were saying in the preamble. So before we get started, let's do the housekeeping stuff. And I'm going to give everybody the heads up. David does have a hard dropout at 1 o'clock Eastern. So if he disappears from your screens, that's why I didn't just mute him and evict him from the room, virtually speaking. And we'll try to get him wrapped up before then. As always, if you're an SBE member and certified, then this webinar, as with all Nautel webinars, does qualify for half of a SBE recertification credit under Category I of the schedule. Jot it down in whatever spreadsheet, list, or notepad that you tend to keep those sort of things available in. If you're not an SBE member, why not? You know, always good to see new members. Well, hey, sooner or later I'm going to ask for a commission, but for right now, it's just, I think that it's an organization that does some good. So the other thing that I want to bring up is that we try to make these as interactive as humanly possible. Of course, some of folks filled out the little advanced questions, and as always, I print them out and keep them in front of me so I can ignore them and pretend I didn't know or didn't see it later. But if you have a question, feel free to type it into the little enter a question for staff box and hit the send button, and we'll answer them as I see them. If you're feeling brave and you can unmute your microphone, you got the little hand wavy icon in your control panel. You click that, and I'll get a little notification on the screen, and I will unmute you and make you part of the conversation. So absolutely, we got say smart people here. And by the way, my other camera quit working. I'm going to keep looking at it. So if you see me looking off in the distance, that's why I'm looking at the place and realizing there's no blue light. So what are we going to talk about? Well, hybrid radio, as I said. Why are we going to talk about it? I don't know, because really this stuff, and David, this is something you could answer for me, but hybrid radio and terrestrial radio are not really competition. They're more complementary. Isn't that fair to say?
Well, yeah, I mean, hybrid radio by definition includes a terrestrial over-the-air signal. And the way I think about hybrid radio is simply as another way to enhance the over-the-air product. And it's not just enhance it in simple ways, it's enhancing it in pretty revolutionary ways, like the ability to provide nonlinear content,
Right.
the ability for interactivity, and the ability to create listening statistics. That's all very important in today's competitive audio environment.
And as we go along, so what I did, Lawrence and David both sent me slide decks, and I merged them all in. So instead of the usual 10 or 12 slides, we've got a whole bunch. We'll power on through those. We're still going to keep it conversational. So regardless of whose slides you're looking at, could be any one of us talking at any specific moment. So again, we're going to have a little fun and hopefully share some information. So Lawrence, you sent me a good slide with, and I'm going to joke about the wall of text, but it's good to have it there. But just talking about how hybrid works, and as cars get more connected and more IP accessible, this is going to become a much bigger deal.
It really is, and I think the key thing about hybrid is that bit in the top right, the radio button. It's IP feeding the radio button. So people initially, of course, think about is hybrid an app that runs somewhere on the radio? You've got to open an app and download stuff or tether to your phone. This is about connected cars, and IP just becomes another input to the radio in the same way as AM, FM, or HD is. It's a fourth input, if you like, into that radio button, and it gives you the advantage that all those services are merged together into a single A to Z list, for instance. It's easy to find. The user doesn't need to know that they have to go to HD2 to find this service because it's in the list and the radio sorts it out for you. If you're out of the area, it can switch you to the IP stream because it's still on your favorites button. You don't need to know the frequency anymore and all this sort of stuff. The radio does it for you. But hybrid is also about merging over-the-air signals with IP metadata. So even though it might not be transmitted as part of your over-the-air signal, the radio knows that this stream information, this live metadata, is associated with that FM or HD radio service.
Good.
So
that's one of the things you
mentioned
mentioned too was how it knows. So we'll talk about that in a slide or two as well.
Yeah, and it's about bringing the radio dashboard to life, really, because, when you think what the competition is, it could be Spotify or all sorts of other third-party non-radio services that can be in the dashboard. They all look great, and we need to look as great if we're going to keep our audiences.
Yeah, and that ties into this is where the tie into the RDS comes, because both the IP signal and the terrestrial one do need to come together. And you'd mentioned this here, and I know David's got a slide in a couple of slides that talks very specifically to field results. And just anecdotally, I tuned in locally here, and I say of the 8 stations I can find here, I can tell you that only one is taking full advantage of their RDS. And David, you've been, of course, all over, and again, we'll talk about the slide in a little bit, but is that your experience as well? Like it's not, definitely RDS isn't universal across the board here.
Well, it's certainly not in use universally. That's certainly true here in the US, Jeff. And I guess that, it depends on markets, right? Here I'm in the Washington, D.C. market, and there's pretty good usage, but you can go to other markets where it's a lot spottier. And that's just, in this day and age, it doesn't make sense because Jeff, you were saying earlier, you guys build RDS encoders into your transmitters or your equipment, so it's not even an extra box for Nautel customers. So
right, and that's true for just about every manufacturer these days. So unless you've got an older gear, and even with them, a Pyrrhus CZ or any of the third-party RDS encoders, you're into the couple $100 range. You're not into the thousands anymore.
Yeah, Jeff, I want to squeeze in a word here about AM radio too, if I might, because if you break it down in the US, there's really four terrestrial radio services: analog AM and FM, and digital AM and FM. And of those 4, analog AM is the only one that's not currently supported in hybrid radios. And the reason for that is that it's impossible really to identify the signal unambiguously. You could make guesses. You could say, well, I'm here, and on this frequency, there's a station in the market and so on, and say, well, it must be this station, and make some hybrid radio decisions based upon that. But that will be flawed, because if you do it at night, you're going to be getting some other station on that frequency. But AM radio broadcasters who are using HD radio can take full advantage of hybrid. So that's just an important point for AM broadcasters, especially right now when I'm sure some of them, if not many of them, are thinking about all digital AM. And is this something I want to do? Do I have a translator that I can keep analog listeners happy with? And those AM broadcasters who decide to go all digital AM are going to bring hybrid radio functionality along with them in the process. So thanks, Jeff. I just wanted to squeeze that in.
Yep. And Shane Tobin made a comment about a rental. And Shane, I'm going to unmute you for a second, because I know you typically have a microphone handy. But you mentioned that the feature, the hybrid radio feature in your rental was interesting.
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
You're good.
Okay. Yeah, it was kind of an interesting experience. I had, this is the first time I'd actually driven a vehicle with that feature. It was a 2021, it's a 2021 Audi Q5, and it had the connected radio features in it. Well, the first thing I figured out was that you need a subscription in order to actually access those features, at least in the Audi. So I bit the bullet, signed up for a month just to try this out. And I was driving around, and sure enough, we have all of our stations for EMF, K11 Air 1. We have most of our stations anyway in the radio DNS database, and we're continuing to update that. So sure enough, it did find a stream for our station as I drove out of the coverage area of one of them. It said, "Would you like to switch to the stream?" I said, "Yes, please," and it did. But of course, switching back was another matter. I don't think I ever actually saw it try to switch back from that stream. So it was kind of interesting, the transition back and forth. The other thing I found interesting was we do transmit rich metadata on some of our platforms, like in our own app, but it actually was doing audio fingerprinting and pulling up tracks. Even on analog stations, it was pulling up all of the rich information, including album art, for those tracks. So that was the other feature I found kind of interesting.
Cool.
What I wasn't so enthralled with was some of the audio quality things. I thought the radio was broken at one point. It may have been something wrong with that particular radio as I was trying to listen to the quality of one of my stations. I knew it sounded better than that, but I wasn't sure what was going on there. But anyway, yeah, it was definitely an interesting experience. I could see how it would be really valuable to some listeners to keep listening to their favorite signals as they drive out of the coverage area. My only hope is that broadcasters would implement it properly so that it doesn't add to listener confusion.
Yeah, and that's kind of the purpose of this whole thing, was to try to bring up some of the things, and this is why we've kept this screen up here with talking about the PI code, because the PI code and how it ties together is going to become a big deal, and that comes back to the bearers. And we were talking about this, and there's another slide that defined the bearers better, but Lawrence, perhaps you could tell me what specifically a bearer is.
So basically, what happens is the car knows a certain amount of information about your radio station. So it knows your frequency because it's tuned into you. It can pick out the PI code from RDS, so it knows that. And the car knows where it is. It knows which country it's in as well. So that can be easily defined. So with those three things, it can send that information back to Radio DNS's servers. And then Radio DNS then connects you with a service provider, whichever service provider your station's signed up with, and that can be yourself, or it can be somebody like Radioplayer in Canada, and or Air, I think, do a number of stations in the United States as well. So there's all sorts of alternatives as to who the service provider can be, and that service provider holds what's called an SI file, and that SI file contains all the information about your station that links your stream to the information the car's just sent back. And so it then sends all that information to the car radio. If you're a radio player station, it can send extra logos and attach you to on-demand content and all this sort of thing as well. And so it really enhances the service you're getting from over the air. And that's kind of how it works. That's how the radio knows what else is associated with your over-the-air signal.
And now this is where this gets critical, and you've got this really nice breakdown on it, because the PI code is huge, and 90, I won't say 90%, at least half of the RDS related calls we get, and because of course we do build RDS generators into our gear now, but at least half of the calls somebody will say it's not working, I can't, it doesn't display artist and song title on my receiver in my car, nothing, this thing's garbage, I need a new transmitter. And most of the time it's because the PI code hasn't been set at all. And if you're transmitting the default, a lot of receivers just won't pick up the RDS, or decode it rather.
That's the thing, and it might be a little bit difficult to get this right to start with. And you know, I'm sure you've had lots of service calls, Jeff, as well, to say how do we do it. But you only need to do it once, and I think that's the key thing here as well. And the bearer includes the PI code, as we mentioned earlier on, but the PI code information also ties into your country code, and if the two don't tie together properly, then radio DNS can't register your service. Because you've not got a valid legal code. And so I know on the last call we talked a little bit about PI codes, and people said, well, you know, ours is unique. It's fine, it works, it's not a problem, is it? But it's that first digit. So in the case of the US station here, the D in front of the 36G, that D says I'm a US station, and that has to appear in the front of the country code as well. And if those two don't match, and that's one thing we found with the radio player, some of the radio player Canadian stations, for instance, those two weren't together. We couldn't then register that service and their bearers on radio DNS, and the whole hybrid radio thing stops working.
Right. And that's a really good point. And it does tie into a question that John had asked in the advanced questions, was how to get RDS items approved by the boss. And like I said, a lot of current equipment has that stuff built in, but when you go to the older stuff, and David, you work with big broadcasters, small broadcasters, and you know, with NAB function, you're all over the map on your clientele or cohorts, consorts, pick your word. What would be the way to tell the boss, look, we need an RDS generator if we've got a transmitter that doesn't have one built in?
Well, you know what? I don't know. I mean, I say that facetiously, and I have to be honest too, and point out that I've never worked in a radio station, so I'm not probably the best guy to talk about this particular question. But I will say that I think that the most effective way to make this happen is what I'll call a top-down approach. You know, don't, you know, and it's challenging for the engineers, because typically the engineers aren't in contact with, you know, the top level people perhaps. Right. So you know, they're talking to I don't know who, you know, a general manager or something, whoever's controlling their budget. And I'm hopeful that, you know, all the webinars like this and all the tons of information that NAB has been producing and making available to these engineers who can see the need for this, that this is helpful for them, that it gives them a way to, you know, talk about the request perhaps in a way that will catch people's attention.
Right.
I wouldn't go to the boss, Jeff. I would go to the marketing team, because, you know, we were saying just before we started that in Europe it would be unthinkable not to have RDS, because no radio station wants their car to appear in the dashboard without the station name on there, for instance. You know, just to have if you look at this, and this is a radio player reference radio, which we used to demonstrate to car companies what good radio should look like, with, you know, nice clear branding and logos and all the rest of it, and now playing and the ability to favorite, all this sort of stuff that they should be doing. Then This is what the broadcasters want. You know, even the smallest community services in Europe would have RDS because they know how important it is to have your name on the dial. If that just said 91.3, it could be anybody. And you know, for a listener to find that is kind of hard. You've got to remember the frequency. I know it's blasted all over the radio stations, but it's much easier to find the name or the logo that you recognize rather than having to remember the frequency, particularly if you've got a few translators scattered around the place as well.
Right. The advantage too, and one of the things I use as a selling point is the fact that you know, for the most part, you can do RDS with what you've already got. Now, obviously, if you don't have an RDS generator in your box, you get an older transmitter, whatever, you're going to need that. But even those are down into the couple of $100 now for some of them. So, you know, at that point, you get the RDS and just I'd sell it as, look, when hybrid radio gets down the stream, having this in and properly configured is going to be crucial to whether or not people can get us on this stuff. And yeah, that's a good point talking to the sales team, because the sales folks are the ones typically that drive a lot of purchases.
Yeah, and say just having the name in the dashboard, and certainly in Europe, a lot of car radios will go shooting past. If you put it on scan, they won't even stop at stations that don't have RDS. So that's kind of important over here as well.
Yeah.
Hey, Jeff, I'm going to throw in a plug here real quick for a company that's fairly, well, a growing company, I guess I'll say, Q Interactive.
Yeah.
And the exciting thing about Q Interactive is that they are working on ways to monetize the RDS data for broadcasters. And Lawrence, hearing you talk about the marketing people makes me think of that, because that's the other thing that the marketing people need to be aware of, is that this RDS service, you know, there's people you can work with today who are positioned to help you start monetizing that. So
Right. So you
that's
could
a very good point, Lawrence, about marketing, and I would concur with you on that.
Yeah, and that's something that can tie in so easily too. You put up a advertisement for Bob's Car Sales, and a GM logo appears on the screen, or whatever. So Stu Albert asked the question, and Stu, I'm going to get to that in a moment as we get into David's slides, because I think it'll fit in well there. But so Shane's already said that he's had an Audi for a rental. I see you've got an Audi on the screen here, as well as a Bimmer. You know, what are you seeing as far as cars with the feature out there? Lawrence, I'll start with you, because you guys have, like I said, with RDS, kind of got a head start on us over here on this side of the pond.
Yeah, I wish one of those was mine. Unfortunately, neither of them are. So Audi kind of took the lead in all of this, and the Q series, which was mentioned earlier, were the first cars to do this, and they're now available in the States. BMW is working on its hybrid radio right at the moment, and new car companies. And David probably will talk a bit more about Android Automotive OS as well, which will be in the dashboard in many cars in the future. Is the way they're all going. You know, particularly as we start thinking about driverless cars, I know they feel like they're 40 years in the future, but they're a lot closer than we think. Then it's going to be even more important to make the infotainment systems within the vehicles better, because drivers are going to be doing less, and they're going to want to be entertained on those long journeys. And the car companies know this. It's a selling point for them. You know, it's something it's expensive for them to implement, but actually it reaps rewards when people are going into the showroom and looking at new models.
Right. And again, that's one of the things that it's a feature that can drive car sales as well. Now, Mark Wachowski from Michigan made a comment here about using the RDS for ads. And Mark, I'm going to unmute you, and I'm going to put you on the spot at the same time, because no, Mark doesn't have a mic. Yeah, no, he's got the easy. Yeah, see, he heard me say put him on the spot. So Mark has created his own RDS generator software, and it's really kind of cool. But anyway, he's saying that for quite a few years they've been doing promoting events on the RDS for car dealers, displaying football scores, et cetera, and so on. So yeah, the ability to use RDS as a data disseminator, a data broadcaster, is really cool. Now I'm going to flick forward because Elaine and Stu have both asked similar questions, and David sent me a big long list of slides, including what looks like a picture of him talking to a whole bunch of people.
No, that's Fred Jacobs.
Oh, okay. No,
I'm
there
not
you
as
go.
handsome as Fred, but thank you for that.
I'm just going to blame it on the terrible quality of the sheet monitor.
This was a photo taken at the radio show in Dallas in 2017.
Oh,
And
okay.
I wasn't
And
sure if that was Fred in his dressing gown.
what we see here is Fred unveiling this Digital Dash Best Practices report, which we first published in 2017. So, and Jeff, I know I'm keeping an eye on the clock here. And you talked a little bit about kind of your own audit of your stations on your receiver. Skip forward another slide, please. And this is just briefly stay here and mention in this Digital Dash Best Practices report, an audit that the Jacobs Media did on behalf of NAB back in 2017 is described, and some of the results are shown. And if you look at the green line here on top, you can see that that's where everyone should be ideally. And when this audit was done, only 14% of stations were considered to be, really on top of their RDS content. So,
and this segues right into what Stu Albert had asked earlier. Besides the number of HD subchannels, artist experience, and bit rates, what else should we consider when selecting between HD configurations, MP1, MP2, MP3, MP6, and MP11 service modes? Are there specific, Stu, you know what? I'm just going to unmute you, and Stu's going to tell me I don't have a microphone either. I can see it coming already. But if you hit your little mute button there, Stu, there you're green. That's a good sign.
Good afternoon, guys.
hey, hello.
So yeah, the basic question is if there's any specific things when trying to select in our HD importer exporter pluses or an importer exporter of your choice, depending on manufacturer, between the MP1, 2, 3, 6, and 11. It's extremely difficult out there in the real world to find the unique differences between those service modes beyond bandwidth of each one of the channels in kilobits, and whether we're going to run artist experience and that. But what about the underlying things that relate directly to the hybrid dashboard?
You want me to jump in here, Jeff?
Yeah, go ahead, David.
So whatever particular mode of operation you're running your HD radio system in really shouldn't bear upon how well that works with a hybrid radio receiver, because that receiver would take advantage of the digital radio capabilities for your over-the-air signal, and then would simply however it's designed to combine the internet content that the broadcaster is making available with the over-the-air content. So, and again, that can be an analog FM, or it could be an all digital AM, or a hybrid AM, or a hybrid is a bad word to use here because that's oversubscribed in this context. But the HD radio. So it shouldn't have a bearing on the hybrid stuff. It has a bearing in other ways. I mean, and Jeff, I'm going to stop talking because you're clearly the expert on HD radio modes. I guess I'll just chime in that my understanding is MP11 is not really supported in receivers right now. So I don't know that MP11 would be a good choice. But otherwise, most broadcasters use MP1 or MP3, I think, with FM.
At the moment, yeah. I mean, and that is right now you're limited more by the receivers than the technology. I guess if this receiver is a technological limitation in a way, but yeah, there are very few receivers. We've got a couple reference ones that'll do MP11, but you're not going to find one in a car. So right now, MP1, MP3, and primarily you do base the decision on available bandwidth and how many signals you want to send. So like if you wanted to send an HD4, you're going to MP3. You're not doing that in MP1.
Yeah.
Now, so that's the basic. Did that kind of hit the question for you, Stu?
Yes, that helps. Thanks.
Awesome. Now, Elaine asked, and this would be one for, I think Lawrence could probably answer it. Are there differences between RDS implementation relative to analog and HD or DRM? Now, on HD or DRM, you're talking, well, in HD, you're talking program associated data, not RDS. So similar but different. Is that true for DRM as well?
That's a really good question. I assume it all works. Certainly HD radio works perfectly well because you can create an HD radio bearer in exactly the same way as you can with analog FM. And I would guess for DRM as well, there's each service has a digital identifier which would go into the bearer, but I've never seen a bearer for DRM. I don't know if you have, David, but
No, I mean DRM isn't widely used. It's used in India, of course, with the AM system, but otherwise, it's you don't see a lot of DRM activity. And I'm trying to remember. I should probably know this off the top of my head because of my involvement with the Radio DNS steering board. But is DRM one of the methods that's included in the standard? I think it is. I'm pretty sure it is.
I would imagine so, but as I say, I've never seen it because it isn't widely used, as you say. So we've never come across a broadcaster that uses it.
No.
Hopefully, there's one out there who will be able to tell us.
So we've been threatening to do a second digital radio webinar at some point in the future. I think I've just jotted myself a note on something that needs to go into that. One thing that Chris Hayes had mentioned that receive a major aggregator quit and obsoleted thousands of internet radio. Is that an issue with the stuff you guys are working on?
Lawrence, do you know what he said? I believe what the attendee is referring to is when TagStation stopped,
Yes.
basically stopped working, and then there were a lot of stations that were using TagStation as metadata service providers, and then of course they had to find another way to support their metadata. So
that's right. This was very early in the game as well, when people were trying to get a foothold into hybrid radio, digital radio. So in car terms, there weren't any cars out there at that point that were using it anyway. So I don't think so. Certainly the car companies that we're talking to, and either use our services or Radio DNS's services or DTS's services. They're all, as of now, they're all being built now, and I think actually it's really important to mention as well. People again think of hybrid as something that we're not going to see for 10 years. So why are we worrying about it now? But actually, the cars are being built and they're being designed right now, and they may not be on the road for 2 or 3 years, but they're being designed on the current technology and what's available and what's out there. And if you're not ready for it, when they start driving out on the road, is going to be too late. So you've kind of got to be in there at the beginning, I think, ready to go, rather than wait till it's happened and you miss out on it all.
Right. So moving ahead on the discussion, you did have some updated information too, David.
Yeah. So the reason I'm dragging up slides from back in 2017 on today's call is because in June we actually updated this report. We included new information on hybrid radio. And Jeff, if you'd go to the next slide here, this is just it's available for free on the NAB website. I encourage you to go download it and read it. We also have a 3-page summary document which just summarizes for programming department and engineering department the key points regarding use of metadata, as well as, and the next slide, please, Jeff. Well, in the report, one of the new things is we're calling out this difference between static and what I call static and dynamic metadata, because these can be handled differently. Static metadata includes station logos, other station information like location or maybe a geofence information on their coverage area, and their streaming URL. So those things are the static things that are easily put in a radio DNS SI file. But the dynamic metadata, like song title and artist, that's the kind of thing that a service provider like Radioplayer can add to the mix. Here's a list of service providers in the updated document. This is also new information, and Radioplayer's on the list there. Jeff, if you don't mind continuing to flip here, there's 5 points that we make in our updated document that I just want to briefly go over. The first here is that metadata support is more important than ever. And what you're seeing here are some screenshots from an Audi A4, which has the same radio that Shane was talking about before that he used in the Q5. And on the left, you see a guide screen, which looks pretty good. There's a logo for every station. You'll notice 97.1 there actually has some now playing information. And that's because that's actually the station that's tuned to when we're looking at this screen. Now, the screen on the right, on the other hand, shows you how it looks when broadcasters don't provide the metadata. You see a generic logo for the station. Even if we were tuned to that station, you wouldn't be seeing the now playing information and so on. And it really looks, like the poor cousin of an audio service. This last screen there, the largest one in the center, this is the favorite screen on the Audi. And what you notice there is it's not just FM. You have 2 FM stations on the list on top. Then you have a Sirius XM station. Then you have an online radio station. And you can imagine how the local stations would, again, look kind of shoddy, if you will, with that generic logo next to these other stations, which are, have jazzed up their identification. So it's important. Second thing here, and this has already come up, Shane, again, mentioned the in-vehicle database. And these in-vehicle databases are kind of a double-edged sword because many broadcasters who aren't providing metadata will look just as good as other stations that do. So some stations are thinking this is great. They need to keep in mind that it's a small percentage of cars that have this. So the vast majority of people don't get the benefit of that. Nevertheless, it's an interesting technology. I wanted to show some examples of the way the Audi works. When a listener sets up the radio, they essentially have to decide whether they want to use the in-car database or the broadcaster database, and what's coming over the air from the broadcast. And what we're going to see in these next couple slides are some examples of the differences. Now, what we're looking at here is this is what the HD radio is providing this information, the logo for the show, the Morning Edition program. And some of you may know that National Public Radio in the US has implemented story level metadata for their 2 main programs, Morning Edition and All Things Considered. So that's what we're seeing here. This is a great example of good metadata for radio. Jeff, if you'll switch to the next slide. If you turn on the Grace Note database, the in-vehicle database, here's what you see instead. The story level metadata is gone. The logo for the show is gone, and it's been replaced with a generic logo that's probably stored in the receiver that was downloaded over HD radio. So it's a crazy, it's the wild, wild west out there in a sense, because, and here's the worst part about this whole thing is listeners probably don't even understand this. They don't understand the setting. They don't understand the implication of selecting the in-vehicle database and the impact that it will have on the over-the-air stuff. And I'll just say that NAB's view is, and we communicate this view to automakers whenever we get a chance, if a broadcaster is providing metadata, the receiver should use it. And if the broadcaster, this is not, and it's easily known, the receiver knows this, then go ahead and use the in-vehicle database. We think that's a great way to maintain the quality of the broadcaster's product and give the broadcaster the opportunity to use that metadata the way they want to. It's their station and it's their signal. So that's the first example, Jeff. I'll try and go a little quicker through these next ones.
Oh, you're good.
This is an online radio station, and here's how it looks when you've selected the broadcaster metadata. You don't see any metadata, you see generic stuff. So flip again, please, Jeff, to the next slide. And pop, if you want, you go ahead and switch in the online, the in-vehicle database, and sure enough, you get that good user experience with the song title and artist and some album art. So this design, and I've talked to Audi about this. I think that their next generation is probably going to adjust, do the settings a little differently. But this is a tough choice for a person to have to make, even if they knew they had to make it. I was an informed user doing a test when I was capturing these images. So I knew about this, but the average listener is just going to use the radio and they're just going to get however it was set before.
Well, and that right there is the big deal. I mean, my wife is my sounding board for all this stuff because she's the one that I watch when we're in the car, and she hits the preset for her station. If she doesn't find the signal, if we're out of range, she hits seek. If she hears something she likes, she hits stop. And yeah, exactly. She does not know how to, even the radio in her own car, she hasn't got a clue how to program it.
Yeah.
If she wants to add a station, she calls me and says, "Hey, can you add this station to my car?" And it's like, sure, I can do that. So exactly, this is one of those things that we really need to try and focus on getting it right, because it's going to be an issue down the road, especially.
Well, and we need to, the broadcasting industry needs to continue engaging the automakers because of problems like this. And it's a problem for us, not necessarily a problem for the car maker, and we need to tell them that it should be done differently.
Right. And again, it's about brands, because my car, which wasn't one of those fantastic Audis or BMWs that you saw there, it's got burnt-in station logos, and as soon as the station changes its brand, or it's bought by somebody else and they change the station name, you're stuck with it until you sell the car. There's nothing you can do about it, and that's really bad for radio, and that's really bad for broadcasters and for listeners, to be quite honest, to find a station they want. If it comes up with the wrong name, is completely rubbish, isn't it?
Yep. Jeff, let me keep going through an example here. Here's another example. This is what we're seeing here is the broadcaster provided metadata. And the cool thing about this example was the way the broadcaster did it. They did what I call staging. The song title and artist and the artwork came onto the display, and the DJ was talking about, I don't know what, maybe some local community thing, and then introduces the song, and then the song starts. So this metadata screen serves as kind of a pre-announcement for the song. And it's something that it's creative. It's something that the broadcaster has worked into their delivery of their content. But if you switch to the next screen, Jeff, and in the car you switch back to Grace Note, not broadcaster stuff, first thing is you never see the metadata before the song has started, because audio fingerprinting is used to establish the metadata. So the broadcasters completely lost the ability to stage it, as I put it. And in this case, the artwork's actually different too. So, these in-car databases are a great thing in some ways, but in other ways they're not. And this is the main way I think that they're not, is in situations like this, where this broadcaster had gone to significant effort, I'm sure, to figure out how to exactly time and stage that information. But it's just totally discarded at the receiver end.
And same deal, yeah. If the it's almost like you'd want to push to have the receiver default to, if there's metadata present on the over-the-air or internet signal, use that, and if not, use the internal
That's
database.
our point, Jeff. That's unlike a broken record in that regard. That's where I'd like to see the industry head in that sense. So, okay, let's flip through. I have 3 other key points. We'll go through these pretty quick. We've been talking about radio DNS. Next slide. Tons of information on how to do radio DNS. If you're a small radio station group and you have some, I'm confident that you have employees who could do this. It's just kind of, run-of-the-mill internet skills in today's day and age. Not skills that I have, mind you, but the IT people whose job it is to do this sort of thing can do this without really breaking the sweat. Next thing is here, we've talked about radio DNS. DTS AutoStage is the other major hybrid platform that's rolling out now, in addition to the ones that Audi and their sister companies are doing. But DTS AutoStage is, it's the Xperi product. They encourage broadcasters to sign up with them directly, because for the cars that their system is in, and so far the only one that we know about is Mercedes, the system will work better. So this is another tip in the updated guideline. There's no reason why every broadcaster shouldn't sign up with them. It doesn't cost you anything. I think it's good for you. You'll probably learn a lot about how to use the system. They have a lot of expertise at Xperi.
Well, and that's really the big thing. I mean, a lot of this, we can give you ideas on the highlights, but yeah, there's a lot of self-education involved as well, because ultimately, like everything else, I don't know about everybody else, I learned to do by messing stuff up and going, whoops, shouldn't have done that, and then going back and fixing it. I'd like to say I get it right the first time every time, but that's not even close. So, and
go ahead, Jeff. I'm sorry.
no, I'm going to say, and so you did bring up an interesting point here with nonlinear content and interactivity as well.
Yeah, and this is something we touched on earlier. Again, this is a screenshot from my Audi test drive, and the Audi has, podcasts, nonlinear content available for you to listen to. And in a hybrid radio, a broadcaster could also take advantage of nonlinear capabilities, but it's a new thing. It's not something that many broadcasters do right now, and especially in vehicles. So the tip is, start thinking about this. Broadcasters, think about your strategy. I'll pick iHeart as an example of a company that, saw this coming years ago, of course, because with the iHeart Radio app, they do all these things. So, but other smaller companies, iHeart is not a representative example, of course, because of their size and scale. They are able to do things that many, or if not most, broadcasters can't. So, but so this is an important thing to do as well. So, Jeff, just 3 more slides here, real quick.
Yeah, one quick comment. Elaine and Chris both came up with the same thing almost at the exact same time. That it seems to me you should limit your text to something that can be read in less than a second to avoid the driver distraction. And there's the third one, three comments on the same thing. Yeah, just basically minimizing the clutter. And I think there'll be, as we move forward, a lot of best practices on how much stuff we throw on that display.
Well, it's funny you all should comment on that, because I'm sorry, go back just for one more second, because this screenshot that I had, there was a bug in the software, I think, because the first time I displayed it, you see the 3 lines of text there? Well, they just kept going, and they wrote over the controls and things, and it obviously looked like something was wrong. But talk about a distraction. Yeah, that's something that you don't want to have to deal with. And I don't know what the thinking is behind Audi's decision to have this kind of information on the dash, but again, this is all that kind of stuff that we need to figure out and start doing.
Right, and it's one of those. It's better to be involved early on. You get a choice. You either drive the bus or you get dragged by it. So that's the farm boy speaking. again, I guess drive the tractor in my growing up years. But the best practices report is kind of a good tie-in to this too, about how you format and how you build it.
Yeah, I mean, it's got information. It's not just information for the engineers, it's information for programmers and on the programming side. But this second bullet point here is one that I have to keep reminding myself of, because we started talking about this in 2017 with this report, and we're going to keep talking about it until we see some real movement on the number of broadcasters. Of course, the U.S. has more radio broadcasters than any country in the world, 15,000 plus.
Right.
So it's a big challenge. So one last thing, I do have a request for everybody on the webinar today. And Jeff, there you go. We have created a survey that we'd love to have as many broadcasters as we can get to complete. One more slide, Jeff, and that shows you the URL for the survey. And I'm assuming is this made available to folks afterwards, Jeff, that they'll be able to find this URL? Yeah. Okay. So
we absolutely archive these so they can scroll through that way, and certainly anybody can email me or screenshot this. I'll leave it up for a couple of seconds. While I'm thinking about it too, Dan Mamone had asked, talking about the yeah, Ed, if you're listening and haven't nodded off on us yet, could you throw the URL up in the chat so everybody can access it there?
There you go.
But Dan had asked a question, and I think I know the answer, so I'm going to answer it and verify, because he was talking about the wall of text about Bruce Lee and whether that's provided by your phone through Bluetooth. And if I'm not mistaken, it's actually provided by the IP link, like a LTE IP link directly to the car radio, correct?
Yes.
Nothing to do with your phone.
Correct, because the Audi hybrid radio system, and I'm sure this is going to be true going forward for most. It's all based upon connectivity in the vehicle, not connectivity through a smartphone.
Yeah, and I know that's one of the things, even in my Chevy pickup truck, if I enable the OnStar and crank the data rates up, the functionality of the dashboard it gets magnified exponentially. Of course, so does my monthly bill, but that's a whole different. So, and now there's the other question. A lot of this stuff, how much of this is subscription and how much of it is just I mean, obviously, I know Radioplayer, I believe, is not for profit. I would read something like that, Lawrence, or do you guys? But I mean, I assume that some salary's got to get paid somewhere along the line.
Yeah, so I mean, there's different models for these different things. So Radioplayer, we believe that we work for the broadcasters, basically. We're owned and operated by the broadcasters. So the broadcasters in each country pay a subscription to Radioplayer, and then we make all our Radioplayer metadata available to the car companies, and we work with the car companies on behalf of the broadcasters at no cost to the car companies. So we're kind of working on the basis that this is an investment for the broadcasters, because they clearly don't want to lose listeners, because that means a lowering of ad revenues, and that's not what any of us want. We want to keep radio strong. So we're working on behalf and for the broadcasters in this, and it's the broadcasters that fund what Radioplayer does.
Hey, but I'm going to jump in here quickly too, Jeff, and just mention that on the consumer side, hybrid radio at the present time definitely is a subscription service. You can look at it like that. Shane mentioned that he had to get a subscription to test it out. And what you find with the Audi, and I think this is true with other vehicles as well, is you don't actually subscribe to hybrid radio. You subscribe to the Audi Connect in this case, in the case of Audi. So there's a whole host of services that are supported by that connection, and hybrid radio is one of them. So the smart money, I think, believes that over time, cars connectivity will not be there will not be a fee for it. But Lawrence, you probably know a lot more about that than I do. But isn't that the sense, is that at some point automakers aren't going to even have subscriptions anymore? It's just going to become part of the vehicle.
Exactly, and I think it will depend on the country as well, because in Europe data is incredibly cheap and it's a lot more expensive across Atlantic, I think.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, just to give you an idea, my mobile phone SIM, I pay £20 a month, so that's, well, I don't know, $23, $24 US a month for 100 gig of data and all my phone calls and all the texts. Um, and that kind of so it's a lot easier to kind of give away data and be connected
Did
here
you say 100 gig?
100 gigs.
100 gig.
Yeah.
Wow. I
So
have a
pretty much
Verizon plan. I get 8 gigs. I pay about
And that's
$6 a
5G
month.
as well. That's 100 gigs of 5G data.
Yeah. Wow. That is a good deal.
And I'm going
Yeah.
to say you'd almost have to add a couple of zeros to that to get my monthly phone bill when I'm like,
So
Wow.
it will depend. I think, and I can't be sure of this because I don't have one, but I think Audi include you know, 1 or 2 or 3 years of Audi Connect in Europe as part of the purchase price of the vehicle, and that will come to the States as well. You know, it's not just going to
eventually,
stay
yeah.
here. And as more people are doing it, of course, they'll have to give it away.
Right. Now I'm going to break in here. I know, David, you've got a meeting in 3 minutes, so I'm going to thank you now very much for spending some time. Lawrence, if you can stay on, and other folks, we've got a few more questions and some more discussion. Well, as always, we've never ended at the top of the hour
Okay.
before. I'd hate to
You're
break the
just going to
perfect
start
record.
talking about me, aren't you, Jeff?
Well, I've got some
That's what I
breaking
said.
news. I've got some breaking
Instead of
news as well
talking to you,
about
we'll talk
DRM.
about you. Absolutely. But no, thank you very, very much for agreeing to spend some time. I know you've been really busy, and it was really a lot of fun to have some time to
Thanks,
chat.
everybody, and great to see you, Lawrence. And
Thank you.
I hope I see all of you who are watching and listening today in Las Vegas in October at the NAB show. So,
Masked up and sanitized and hiding from everybody. All
thank
right.
you.
Well, thanks again, David.
Thank you, David. Good to
Bye-bye.
Lawrence, I'm going to hit you with this question now. So Chris wants to know where the aftermarket is, and you'd already mentioned that we're probably only a couple, 3 years away from seeing this rolled out on a much more general scale than the top end cars.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Audi are part of the whole VW group, so that's everything from Skoda to Volkswagen to Audi to Porsche. You know, they're all part of the same group, and you know, BMW, who are doing this now, have also got Mini in there as well. So it's absolutely coming. And then when we get onto things like Android Automotive OS, which you know, we're working on at Radioplayer, and the NAB are working on as well, which is what Android will be introducing into the dashboard. That's probably going to go into 70% of new cars, and that's completely hybrid as well. So it's going to be there. You know, you see things change. You know, cars all have GPS now. 10 years ago, no car had GPS, and you know, once one car does it in a price range, then they all have to do it, or no one's going to buy them.
Right.
Let me just go back to that breaking news, if I can, Jeff, as well. Thank you to Jack, who is my brains and tells me everything I need to know about everything, because he's far cleverer than I am. There is an ETSI standard for bearer datas in DRM. We don't know of anybody who's using it yet, but there is a standard for it. So if you want to set up a DRM station and have bearers, you can do it.
Excellent. And Chris also asked if there were any, and safe to assume, I think that at this point, there's no aftermarket receivers like Kenwood or Pioneer or anything like that that are incorporating hybrid at this point.
Not that I'm aware of. Radioplayer did actually do a thing called Radioplayer Car, which is where we learned our hybrid things to start with, and that was about 3 or 4 years ago, and that was the very first hybrid radio that you could fit in cars in the UK, and it had a DAB receiver in it as well, so a lot of people kind of fitted it for the DAB elements, but that actually was hybrid. But no, I think really it's going to be inbuilt, because it's so reliant on the dashboard and that connectivity in the vehicle anyway, that really it's got to be fitted in the factory.
I know, just looking, and again, I've got a Chevrolet pickup truck, so the big pickup truck, and I can't see any way that I could pull the radio head out of it easily without,
Mm.
yeah, without pretty much disassembling the entire dashboard. So
Yeah, because I mean
that,
everything's in there now, isn't it? Your GPS is in there, and absolutely everything is built into the single unit.
well, yeah, and I mean, again, if I enable the OnStar, the list of apps that's available all of a sudden triples. So I think as we go forward, we're going to find more and more that Chris says
Yeah.
Sawzall. So one of those reciprocating saws that'll fix my dashboard problem. Now, George had asked, let's see here, get back up. What is the case to be made for lobbying manufacturers to include radio versus developing streaming and nonlinear? So I guess for including terrestrial radio as opposed to just going to a totally IP-based system. And I think my answer to that would probably be, and the US would be an excellent example. There are still huge parts of the US where you can't get an LTE cell phone signal. You're
Yeah.
lucky, I mean, you know, so in those areas, terrestrial radio is it. And that if nothing else is the big argument. What would you say to that?
Well, I'd say, you know, if you ask any US broadcaster, they're going to be going, no, 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 because the streaming costs in the US are so horrendous that, you know, they
Hmm.
want you back on the over-the-air signals as soon as you possibly can. And also, you know, you can move into 5G territory, and it's a lot easier to kind of segregate bandwidth for radio signals. But when you're kind of moving at speed down motorways, in very rural areas, as you say, getting a good signal is so difficult,
Hmm.
and the mobile operators just aren't built for it. There's going to be so many demands on their services anyway. The last thing they probably want is everybody receiving their radios that way as well.
Right. And I mean, it's one of those things as we add more bandwidth and sometimes at the expense of other broadcast services, C-band, but as we add more bandwidth for LTE and the 5G, and as we see the data rates go down and potentially 5, 10 years down the road, just having the data included with the price of the car, you
Mm.
may see that change, and it is very much an evolution. But
Yes,
for right now, I think the terrestrial is a huge part of the system.
it's also that question of royalties, though, isn't it? That you know, streaming royalties are so expensive as well that people want to try and keep away from pushing people in that direction if they can possibly help it.
Hmm. Yep. So there's a lot to be lot to be thought about yet. Okay, closing thoughts. Anything that comes to mind that we haven't covered to enough degree?
I think it's really, you know, think about the future now,
Hmm.
before it's too late. Think about the branding, and David had some really good slides there of dashboards showing station logos and album art. That it's so important to light up the dashboard. I always say that the dashboard really is your shop window if you're a
Hmm.
radio station. And what some broadcasters do here, for instance, with their RDS feed, is not only tell you what's playing now, but what's going to play next. So if you don't
Hmm.
quite like the song that's on right now, then you think, oh, well, actually, I'm going to stay for the next one because I do like that one.
Yeah.
And it's all about selling. And as broadcasters, we've got to get really good at this because we've probably not done it so much in the past. TV's been doing it for years with trails uh, and all the stuff that television does. But in radio, we just kind of pump out the tunes and Good Company and all the rest of it. And we've got to think about how we sell ourselves against all the other, you know, multi-billion-dollar tech giants who are trying to take audiences from us.
And I think that may be the big thing is that until fairly recently in radio years, radio was the only game in town, so they didn't really have to be all that competitive, you know. But now, yeah, like you say, you could be streaming off your cell phone, you could be listening to Sirius XM, you could be doing any one of 15 different things over and above. So yeah, becoming more marketable is really big. I'm just checking through the list of advanced questions. There's question best source for album art and best implementation to get album art and logos to be seen on receivers. And that really kind of varies by where you are too, doesn't it?
Yeah, so for radio player stations in Canada, we're just about to introduce album art for your services, so that we will add the album art if you don't already have it. The big problem with it is licensing and international rights, and being able to negotiate as a small station, or even a quite large station, to have to negotiate those rights, because your images may be used in a car dashboard, they could be used in your app, on your website. There's so many places, and of course the people that hold the rights for those images want some money for that,
Yeah.
and that's a really hard thing.
Yeah, there was on one of David's slide a list of some providers of radio experience and listener experience type stuff. So that is also a good resource. Let's see. Should our radio broadcasters considering using 5G for delivery of their signal? Well, that's really kind of I think the whole point of this is not one or the other, but both,
Yeah,
especially at this point. Now, maybe down the road as data rates go down, it may be all over the 5G, but
and,
we're a
and
long way from that yet.
yeah, and I think that's the whole point of hybrid, isn't it? It uses the best of everything. So, in our user experience, we always say it's got to be the terrestrial service first, to take the signal from your transmitter first, supplement it with IP data, and only when that FM or HD signal disappears do you switch to the IP stream, and then switch
Yeah,
back as quickly as possible afterwards,
yeah.
because that saves the broadcasters and saves the listeners money.
hmm and one other question, and I'll ask you this just as an opinion type thing, but a good receiver to use at the studio to monitor your RDS signal.
Ooh, you probably know that better than I do, Jeff. Particularly what's available in the USA and Canada.
I mean, I like the Innovonic. I mean, just because it's pretty ubiquitous and relatively inexpensive, and they're relatively rugged too, and they're very broadcast purposeful. Mark has mentioned in the questions that the Diva 4005 does a good job. So shout out to those folks. So there are definitely some options. And on that note, I do want to remind everybody, because we did have a lot of URLs and different information things. So do remember that this webinar, as with all Nautel webinars, will be archived. You can reach it. Again, Mr. Disembodied Voice, Ed Sylvester, will have this up on the website, usually tomorrow at the very latest. Depends, if he stops for a snack in the middle, might be tomorrow afternoon instead of the morning, but he's pretty prompt about that sort of thing. And so a shout out to Ed for being the guy that actually keeps the cats in line, so to speak. We got talking earlier about how herding us can be a bigger challenge than anything. We've got I used to speak English, but not anymore. A Waves newsletter comes out every 2 to 3 months. I think we're due for another one shortly. I say that every week. Eventually, I'll be right. What do they say? A broken clock is right twice a day. So also, there's the YouTube channel for tips and tricks and online info. While I'm thinking about it, I don't know if we included your URL, radioplayer.org, correct?
At radioplayer.org, that's the one.
Yep, and of course NAB for anybody can find the NAB website, and I know David had that one on some of his slides. Other online sources: Barrie, Michigan's BDR, the Broadcaster's Desktop resource. There's broadcastengineering.info. There is a plethora of Facebook pages. If you want to talk about transmitters, satellite receivers, studio stuff, you name it, there's a Facebook page for it. Some better than others, caveat emptor. On that
I should tell you
note,
as well,
yes.
that transmitter in my slides is Crystal Palace, in case anybody wants to know. It's the FM, DAB, and TV transmitter for London, and it's what I can see right outside my window because it's about a mile away. So,
Oh,
so if
beautiful.
anybody was wondering what it was, that kind of Eiffel Tower impersonator, it's Crystal Palace.
Excellent. Well, there you go. So I learned something today, and I've driven by it, but I haven't seen it. So I did a lot of work on the Orford Nest site over near Ipswich
Lovely site.
several years ago. That's an awesome site. But on that
Yeah,
note, Lawrence, I want to thank you very much. I know you're reaching close to dinner time in your time zone at the moment,
it
and
is.
so
Thank
thank
you,
you
Jeff.
very, very much for spending the afternoon with us. It was a wonderful
My
time.
pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you to everybody. I hope I've not sent you all to sleep. And hope my awful UK accent wasn't too much of a turn off for you all. But thank you for inviting me, Jeff. Anyway, it was a pleasure.
My pleasure. As I said earlier, I'm bilingual. I speak English and American, but folks, absolutely thank you again for spending an hour and change with us today, and we hope to see you next time. Have a great day now. Bye.
Bye-bye.